Is Europe's most dangerous volcano about to blow? It is an enormous hidden supervolcano that scientists have been monitoring for years because it could erupt and cause worldwide devastation. But is it actually going to do so? Or was this story blown way out of proportion? Let's take a look at the facts and find out. Campi Flegrei is a volcano in Italy, just off the coast of Naples. For thousands of years, it has been one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world. The volcano is 9 kilometers or 5 miles wide and is one of the largest volcanic complexes in the world. But it's not one single volcano. Instead, it's made up of over 120 individual vents. This means that if there was an eruption, it wouldn't be coming from one spot, but rather multiple spots all across the complex. And with so many vents, the eruption column would spread outwards in all directions. The reason why it's considered a supervolcano is because of how big its caldera is. A caldera is what's left behind after a massive volcanic eruption, and Campi Flegrei's caldera is 13 kilometers or 8 miles wide. The thing is, though, that it isn't a single continuous caldera. Instead, it's made up of several overlapping calderas that are scattered around the entire complex. In total, they make up a region that is 13 by 9 kilometers, or 8 by 5.5 miles. Campi Flegrei is so large that if it were located anywhere else on Earth, it would probably be considered multiple different volcanoes. But because they're all connected, it's instead treated as a single volcanic complex. If this volcano were to erupt today, it would cause major problems for nearby cities. More than 3 million people live within the zone where Campi Flegrei's ash could fall, including the cities of Naples and Caserta, which both have more than 1 million people each. Not only that, but it's also fairly close to Rome, which has more than 4 million people. These cities can expect pyroclastic flows, lahars, floods, volcanic bombs, heavy ashfall, and a likely tsunami. So, what would happen to the rest of the world? Well, first we have to look at the eruption itself. Scientists measure the explosivity of eruptions using the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or the VEI. You might have heard of this before as the scale that determines how dangerous a volcano's eruption is. Campi Flegrei's caldera is huge, which means that when it erupts, it will likely be a magnitude 8 on the VEI. To put that into perspective, the biggest eruption in history was 32 on the VEI. Mount St. Helens, which erupted in 1980, had a VEI of 5. So Campi Flegrei would have an eruption almost 6 times larger than that. Ash would shoot hundreds of kilometers into the air and spread across the entire Mediterranean. Hot flows of gas and ash would speed down the sides of the volcano and race across the surrounding countryside. Cities near the volcano would be completely destroyed and covered in ash. People would likely die in their thousands, if not millions. But that's just the local effects. What would happen to the rest of the world? Well, there are 2 main factors that determine the global effects of Campi Flegrei's eruption. The first is how much ash gets into the atmosphere, and the second is how long it stays there. The more ash that gets into the atmosphere, the colder it'll get around the world. If all goes well, only 10 billion cubic feet of ash would make it into the atmosphere. That's enough to cover the entire surface of the United States under 3 inches of ash. Crops would fail, and the global temperature would drop by up to 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Food shortages and global famine would likely follow shortly after. And then there's the second factor, how long the ash stays in the atmosphere. This is hard to predict since some ash falls back to the ground after just a few weeks, while other ash can stay there for years. Unfortunately, if Campi Flegrei were to erupt today, it would likely stay in the atmosphere for decades. Hotspots would develop over the poles and cause the ice caps to melt. Sea levels would rise and coastal cities would be flooded. All in all, the eruption of Campi Flegrei would be one of the worst natural disasters in human history and would likely kill billions of people. So is this volcano actually going to erupt any time soon? Well, probably not. But that doesn't mean that it won't happen eventually. Throughout history, Campi Flegrei has had several very large eruptions. In fact, it's responsible for one of the largest eruptions in human history. In 1538, the volcano erupted with a force of 1,000 cubic kilometers of ash and rock. It was the largest eruption in Europe since the Black Death. Neapolitan scientists predicted that the end of the world was upon them. They believed that the anti-Christian Turk was behind it all and that he would soon invade and destroy the city. Fortunately for them, the anti-Christian Turk never came, and the city was largely spared from serious damage. But it was definitely a close call. Since then, the volcano has largely been quiet, which is why it might come as a surprise to you that scientists are worried about another eruption. But don't forget that just because the volcano hasn't erupted recently doesn't mean that it won't erupt soon. In fact, it might be due for another eruption, and scientists may have already seen signs of it starting. In 2012, scientists noticed that the ground was bulging upwards in the middle of the caldera. Since then, it has bulged up by 35 centimeters or 14 inches. This could mean that magma is rising from deep underground and creating a magma chamber underneath the caldera. Magma chambers are what hold magma before it erupts, and the larger the magma chamber, the more likely it is that an eruption will occur. On top of this, the frequency of earthquakes in the area has increased in recent years. The magma chamber may be putting pressure on the rocks surrounding it, causing them to break and creating small earthquakes. There have also been more hot steam vents opening up across the caldera. This may seem like good news, like the pressure is being relieved and that an eruption is less likely, but it's actually a bad sign. That's because these vents usually only open up before there's an eruption. In fact, between 1982 and 1984, 130 new steam vents opened up before Campi Flegrei's most recent eruption. Between 2012 and 2017, 30 new ones opened up. This is concerning because it means that something may be happening below the surface. Finally, there's the gas emissions. Campi Flegrei emits gases like carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide. Sulfur dioxide is usually the main gas emitted by volcanoes before they erupt. The amount of sulfur dioxide released by Campi Flegrei has largely remained constant since the 1970s. However, it appears to be increasing once again, which could mean that magma is rising from beneath the surface and preparing for an eruption. Now, even though there are worrying signs that Campi Flegrei may be waking up, scientists don't think that there will be an eruption anytime soon. Plus, they're carefully monitoring the volcano to ensure that they'll know as far in advance as possible if there is going to be an eruption. So you might be wondering, why did everyone freak out then? Well, it's because in 2020, scientists published a paper saying that they thought that Campi Flegrei was at a critical point. They thought that the magma chamber was almost full and that an eruption could occur at any moment. This caused politicians and the media to start talking about it, and everyone freaked out. But it turned out that this wasn't quite true. The paper got a bit of attention, but it wasn't quite as dramatic as everyone thought it would be. It looks like we'll all have to wait a bit longer before we see Campi Flegrei erupt. But don't worry, it will happen eventually. The thing is, because of how dangerous the volcano is, it should be pretty easy to predict when it will erupt again. Scientists have a number of monitoring stations set up all around the volcano that keep track of things like gas emissions, ground deformation, and earthquake frequency. Because of these stations, scientists will likely be able to tell at least a year or two before Campi Flegrei erupts, and that gives a lot of time for people to prepare and evacuate. Now go watch. Can Vesuvius erupt again? Or click this other video instead.